Hello, guys. Welcome back. So, I have stumbled through this kind of everything we've done to date, and it's not too bad. Um, we've taken the basic SVG element that we had, um, and it's more of an escaping game at this point because we're adding a string to the body when we instantiate. Um, and what I'm talking about is our, you know, we did kind of this last last video, right? So we created this SVG element and we instantiated it, and here's what that looks like. But we hard coded it as HTML, and then we went directly after it, and then we got the different events, and we set those values to functions. So it's kind of hard to get these variables inside of a class definition. So that's really why I was kind of stumbling around. I started to go after it and trying to show you like where I stumble, but it was just taking too long because it was a little difficult, and I did have to just kind of tweak it. So it was just taking too long to kind of put all on video while I was going through it. So I was kind of hoping that you would see kind of the struggle, but that's all right. I go ahead and use it and try to incorporate it yourself, and you'll begin to struggle a little bit if you're not used to the process. Primarily in escaping, you're going to be escaping some things, and then we have to pay attention to order, and I'll try to clue you in, and we'll just do a rundown of what I've done now that I've ported yesterday's work over to today's work. So plus I added some different functionality. So why don't I go ahead and just demo what this thing does at this point? And let me just make sure it's refreshed. Okay, and then so all I really do now is I take my control key and I hold it down, and then I double click somewhere. And when I double click, it adds a new. Every time I double click, it adds a new version of this or instance of this dialog, and it auto gives it a name. It just keeps incrementing from D, and then it adds a number to this global variable here inside of this ID string object, and then I can hold control again, double click, and I get a new object, and I'm hoping you're kind of seeing the power here, because now this is like a really dynamic HTML page, and at any point in time I can go and grab something and move it, and we can do all sorts of little control keys and event listeners and all sorts of things to either modify our what our dialog boxes are doing, pop up other submenus like context menus to say, hey, I need you to add another shape in here, or I mean, the possibilities are endless. Or hey, I need you to go call an AJAX request, go grab some data from the server and pull it back in and do something with this, or go populate some others that are related to this. I mean, all these structures and things. Now you can go learn JavaScript like fully, right, and understand how to like do some data arrangement and data manipulation and data housing and stuff like that. Um, but it's really the power. I wanted to bring the power down to this point right here, because all the rest of it is just going and learning about more of the language. So if you have this, now you're extremely powerful with what you can do, and then you can go and read up on, well, how do I get JSON between, right, my local client and my server and back again, or whatever. How do I use Ajax? How do I use PHP? Or how do I call some sort of like, I don't know, maybe like a Google API or something that provides a RESTful API to you to go and query and or do stuff with, and then pull it back local to the browser and then go use it however you want to. So that is OOP. That's why I started here, because it's so powerful, and I'm hoping you're seeing it. I know it's kind of funny because these are just like boxes on the screen, but I mean, every time I touch it and move it, it's doing exactly what I want it to do, and that's where the power comes in. So, all right, let's get into the rundown of the program here. So let's look at this. So I'm gonna, maybe I'm just going to yeah, we're going to switch back and forth between here and maybe even here, because remember, this was our first exercise where we, it's not our first exercise, actually this was our first exercise, right? That was kind of our video one, right? Where we talked about CSS and HTML and JavaScript, and then we quickly moved into OOP at the basics of properties and methods, and then we talked about the first part of events and how we set them, and now we're taking all of the stuff prior, and including what we're doing with like different styles and things on CSS. We're manipulating, or we're hard coding HTML data, and we're using JavaScript the whole time in these script tags, and now we're going to start using these events, and now we're going to tie it all together and make it a, so these events are happening inside of the prototypes and inside of the document body element, and that's where this stuff shines. So it's all the same stuff. I think in a certain way, I believe there's a lot of developers that think this way. The problem is that I think most web developers don't think this way, because they're used to working with like CSS the way I presented it back here, up here. They're used to working with it this way, and they do a lot with it, and they're good at designing and making layouts and things. But when you put it here, the design becomes super dynamic, and it's happening on the local side as well. Now I think I'm going to make an extension of this series. It won't be in this series, but it will spawn directly out of this, and I'm not sure when exactly. But what I would like to do is I would like to come from here, like whatever we do here, and then wherever we instantiate an object and we place it, not necessarily anything in between, but once we drop it, I want that on mouse up event to go and trigger an AJAX call to store the location of this. So then when we come back to it, the first thing that the page does is it goes and it looks at the web server, and it queries all the objects that were on the screen. It redraws them exactly the way you left it, and now you kind of have this dynamic, persistent, work in progress type thing that's all web based. So I think that would be good. That would be good to kind of complete the whole, like, I shouldn't say the whole. There's a lot of different things out there like MVC, Model View Controller, and other things. But if we can explain a little bit of the back end and see what happens on databases and what happens on like PHP, and that's probably what I'll use first, then we can see kind of the world of at least how the web works. Because you obviously know how the clients work, at least by browsing to any web page on the internet. And now we'll get a peek at like what happens on the back end to serve all this up and to store it, and you'll get a glimpse of that, and then you'll be able to kind of see what it takes to kind of do, and that's really what I want to get us to ultimately. My vision isn't super short-sighted in terms of just OOP only. I showed you enough. Okay, we're done. Don't ever come back here for any more information. That's not the intent. The intent is to show you how to work on application development or game programming or a, maybe a combination between some of that, and leverage all of it. Leverage that whole stack because it is super powerful. All right, let me digress and hop back into what you were here for. You were here to figure out how to get these things in here. So, all right, so I'm going to bounce back to here real quick. So we copied this, we pasted it in here, and we had to escape it because it needs to be a string. We're adding a string to the existing string that this property stores. This inner HTML is the property of the body. So when I like right click on here and I go to inspect, and let me pull that back a little bit. All right, so when I come into here and I look in the body, all of this, at least less the script tags or whatever, because I'm not really worrying about that, but all of this needs to be rendered as a string because that's what this returns, or that's what this, I guess, kind of stores for us as a string. So we need to add it that way. So how to escape a string? Let's see here. Well, if we go back, was it to here? We kind of did it here, and we started to escape strings here. So we add a backslash, and we put the quote. So what does that mean exactly? Let me open up a new document here. So if I would normally, let's say I'm normally like in a script tag, and I would normally say document dot write line or something like that, right? Why can't I type properly today? I get in those modes, you know. Anyway, so if I'm going to write a string directly out, I'm going to say this is my string. But when I'm writing things that are kind of code-based, which HTML, it's a language, it's a code language. So if I were to write like div and then say ID equals, and then I need to put some quotes here, I need to escape them, and then I need to keep moving, and I need to say like class equals, and then, you know, style equals, and, you know, probably close that off and then just put in some, I don't know, text. This is my div element, and then close the div. Okay, so if I did a document.writeLine that way, that's valid. So I'll actually get a div on the screen, and this will render in the browser. But what it does is this basically goes and gets the body element. It takes whatever's in here and it just appends it to the end. So that kind of works, but it's not as exactly straightforward as that. So now when I get into just other things, just realize that we might have to nest. We might have to nest text another level deep. Every once in a while, we get into where we have to nest it another level deep. Because let's say that I actually wanted to render not the div itself, but I wanted to show you how to code it on the screen. So maybe I need to nest this one more level. So what would that look like? So I'm just going to say this is a div ID equals something like that, and then I'm just going to do that. But now I have this other thing inside of it that I need to actually like escape out. I need to escape that to you somehow. So let's see. So let's say that I put that in quotes and I escape that quote. And now I'm going to, actually let's just turn this into an HTML document real quick. I'm going to skip the head in this case. Ignore my bad practice on that because it's just for this quick and dirty example. And I'm going to end the body and end the HTML. Okay, so I'm going to escape this. So now I'm already inside of this kind of nested escape, which means I don't want to end it there because that is kind of the end quote for this beginning quote. So I need to nest another escape, and to do that, I escape a backslash. So to basically render a backslash and to then render a nested quote, which it just gets that extra level deep. So now I also need to add 2 more there, and I need to add 2 more there, 2 more there, 2 more there, 2 more there, and then once I get to the end of this, then I do my end div, and this one needs to also be, so this quote is the ending one to this quote, if that makes sense. So I hope I'm right. I hope I did that right. So let's save this real quick. I'm just going to save this as HTML, and we're going to just call this escape hell, because there's nothing nice about it. I'll call it 001 or something. Alright, so then I'm going to run that in the browser. Launch in Chrome, and it says this is my div element. So it didn't quite work the way I expected to. Let's go ahead and put an ID in here. We're just going to call it div1. We're going to call the class class1 style some style. I mean, we don't really need anything in there. Let's see here. So this is why I'm stumbling around, because this stuff gets so difficult, and when you start escaping stuff like this, it's so difficult to understand like what went wrong. Like where did we go wrong here? So all right, so I'm going to call this the real element. Okay, and because that's really what I want. That's my real element object. Okay, so there's my start and end quote, and then I got this other quote, which I guess it's because I'm just trying to show this. So I'm actually not sure how to show a div tag. That's so funny. Let's try to escape that. And I'll try to also escape that. And let's see what happens. I don't know if that'll work. Okay, let's look on our console. There's no errors, so again, super hard to debug. Oh, I think instead of escaping this way, I think what we really need to do is do, these are HTML characters now, so HTML is weird. It ignores certain characters, but to actually physically get them in there, it's something like this. It's like LT and then semicolon, and then for a greater than, it's like, so like here I'm going to need a greater than. So it's going to be like and GT, and then we're going to have to do the same thing here. So it's and LT, and then and GT. Sorry, I had to wait till that popped back into my mind because I don't use that very often. All right, so there we go. So maybe I didn't need to nest all that, but you notice what happened? That when I backslash, that gave me my backslash. When I backslash quote, that gave me a single quote. And then it just kind of looks like I'm teaching you how to parse something in the browser. So sometimes we need to do that. It's hard for me to kind of think exactly like, other than something like this, where you would actually have to do that. So I'm glad we got there quick enough. Let's get back to our stuff. All right, and you'll notice that I'm escaping a quote. I'm ending this quote with this one, and then I'm adding our class's ID string here, and then I'm adding another escaped quote because the ID needs to be surrounded by quotes. And then on mouse down kind of does the same thing. The event needs to be surrounded by quotes. There's nothing in there. It's a blank, like it's the same as if I just well, I'm just escaping them, so when it renders, it comes out looking like quote, quote, something like that. And then we just keep going. So it's the same stuff as this. It's just every time I ran into something like this, I hit backslash and backslash and backslash and backslash. So that's all I was doing. And then, of course, you saw I added a couple inline events, and that was there as a placeholder just to get everything to work. So, hold on, let me reload from disk here. Yes. Okay. And don't need that. Okay, so, and I also want to reload this one from disk because I was messing with it and it was working very well. And I don't want to mess that up. Okay, don't want to save over top of this one. Okay, so what did I do? Well, one, I definitely made my boxes bigger because I gave it a bigger value. Primarily because I copied some bigger values from our original, right? I kind of copied this whole thing. I got rid of this line, and then we pasted in this thing, and then we went in and we escaped it. Okay, and then I was having some issues with the document.write line, so then I went after it this way. So there's a fine balance to all this stuff, and it really takes like repetition to get to know what you're doing. And then just so that I could read this stuff, I did this little trick here. I want to share that with you while we're kind of in this section. So I'm writing a string out. I'm saying plus equals. That's saying whatever is in here, because I don't want to overwrite it. Whatever is in here, add to it another string, and this is the string. But because I want this on multiple lines, it's just safer to add an empty string, add a plus, and then start your string back here underneath that. So, I mean, could you imagine this line or this line directly after this one, directly after this one, directly after this one? That would scroll forever, and it's already long. Like, I have to scroll way out there just to get to see this stuff. So, anyway, then of course we have to break like all these areas where I need to interject a value from our class definition. So there's all that stuff as well. And let's see here. That's all I really did on this, other than add these events. And I think I primarily just wanted those there so I can hijack them. But I don't know if I necessarily needed those or not. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make another version of this we can mess around with. So I'm going to save as, and so it's 5, and I'm just going to call it 5A. And then I'm going to just cut this out and save it, and then I'm going to launch this one now in the browser, and let's see if everything still works. So I held Control and I clicked. Oh, sorry, double clicked. And so far so good. Double click. So far so good. Come back here. Yeah, I think things are working. I didn't think that was super necessary. So again, I was clunking around and trying to figure out what I needed, what I didn't. And then I got everything to work. I'm like, let's make a video. And of course, there's still some things in here. It's like, I don't know if I really needed to do those things or not. But yeah, that works. So we didn't need to hard code that. All right, let's go back into it. So we got this. Practice on escaping and understanding what it means to escape some stuff. And maybe there's some, I don't know, maybe it's worth Googling or Binging or whatever, right? Maybe it's worth looking at and seeing, like, hey, is there some text parsing exercises or something like that? And I mean, this isn't necessarily parsing text. There we go. So text.split, maybe not. And then you go into some really cool stuff. If you keep looking at like how to parse text, you get into this regex stuff. And this is really cool stuff. It's really powerful, but it's really detailed. It's really hard to wrap your mind around, and once you do, it's like the world's opened up. Like, whoever made that is awesome. And then you don't use it for a year, and then you come back and you have to go learn it all over again because it's like, how do I use that again? But you know it's there. Let's see. JavaScript parsing text with escape with maybe nested quotes. Let's do that. Nested quotes. Okay, so yeah, they're doing it all over the place too. So there's stuff you can go find. I just picked one and grabbed it. So anyway, that's what I would recommend you go and do. Just go search for some exercises on, maybe something you can go practice. And if you find one, go to the bottom of the video and there's a comment section. And go ahead and leave a comment and let us all know, like, hey, I found this really cool place on where to go parse text. So yeah, go. If you're aware of it or you know about it, share it with us. All right, so moving forward. Okay, so how did I get from that to this? Okay, so this is the hard part, right? This is the really hard part. And then something else pops up. So I created this add events function, and I'm going to explain why. Because when we added these, right, when we added them on a element that already existed. And this is where the hard part kind of comes in. So just pay attention to the sequence of things here. Wrong doc. Actually, I want to move that over just so it's not in my way. And I don't keep clicking on it. Okay, so this gets created. Okay, so what I tried at first is I'm like, okay, well, go ahead and do this, and then immediately I came in here and I'm like, it would be awesome if I could just add all the events like in here in the constructor because I want the events to work. And you kind of saw like I was trying to play with that idea a little further because I had some in here as well. And I was trying to code some of those in there, and I stripped them out. And I'm just trying all these different things because they're not quite working. But I was getting a sequence. My sequence was all wrong in doing this because what had happened was all this is a definition, right? It's saying I'm going to define a function. Well, as soon as I go define a function, it's trying to it didn't execute that yet. But when I do something like equality or something like it does try to go get valid objects. Like if I'm getting a property, so it can't resolve this object because it doesn't exist yet. It wasn't rendered out to the body yet because I didn't instantiate this a version of this object or this class object. So I had to pull it out, and we had to do something different. Let me I'm just going to refresh this. So let's go through, just so you kind of understand, just while I'm talking through the sequencing of it. And I don't need to pull this out that far anymore. We're not looking at that SVG craziness, and we know what it looks like. So let's say we're going to say D1, right? We're going to do our D1 equals new dialog D1, right? You guys remember that. Now, I don't have any events because it first and foremost, it had to render this to the screen. So that's all I got. And then, of course, I also populated my object with these different, right? Those are kind of preset. Even the message is preset, and the visibility and the colors and all that preset. Now, I had to kind of trick this because what I wanted to do is I added this parameter here, or sorry, not parameter, this property. And what this does is it stores the reference to the object that the browser has when this gets created. Because when I go do a document.getElementById, right, which I did here, but I did it after this is added. So I have this init function, and once I set this property or that's in my object here, once I set it to that, now I can go add events to that object, because that object's going to resolve back to the actual object that's on the screen here, plus have all the properties of our defined object. So it gets really weird because this is like a two-in-one object. This is the browser's object of what it automatically generated with this, and then we attached it to this dialog object D1, and now that we have that, we can operate on both simultaneously, almost as if it were a single object, if that makes sense. So that's all I really did. I didn't change this function, I don't think. I don't believe I did. Oh, yes I did. I apologize. I did do that because I wanted to set the rectangle, so I named them those things. It's not a huge change. You can make sense of it. If you pause the video, and here I'm just going to, so starting at now, I'm just going to go through the different sections, and you can pause it if you need to slow down and look, and also expand this so you can see everything. So starting now, I'm going to, and you can pause it for every section, and I'm just going to go through this, give you time to pause it, and then I'll scroll down to the next one, and then we have this 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 one. Okay, so I know I didn't change these. These three stayed the same. If I changed anything, I changed this one because of we were using that that div element before, right? This not this one, the 003 version. Let's go ahead and launch that. Launch in Chrome. 003. I don't even remember how we instanced that. Maybe it was the same. I think it was D1. New dialog. Yep, that's how we instanced that one. And I'm going to scroll back a little bit. Okay, so because I was messing with a div, that's what this is. It's a div tag. Now I'm messing with the SVG stuff, and I have some extra information inside. Like I have the rectangle to deal with, and I have the text object to deal with. So yes, I did modify this to handle those things. Okay. But beyond that, here's the order that mattered. I had to instantiate this object. Then I had to initialize the object, which what I called initializing was basically taking the rendered element on the page and registering it back with the new instance of this class, right? Through this, I'm assigning this object right there so it can keep this in memory. And then I can go add events to that object, which is the HTML object. Now all my stuff kind of works the same. So I can now make this reference, this R1 reference, because I know what this.obj is in my class, because that's how I reference local variables to my class, if that makes sense. It's kind of weird. It gets a little nested here. Do me a favor, rewind, repeat the video if it's not making sense. Think about it a little bit. If you're kind of losing track, just rewind it back, play it again, hear what I said, think about it a little bit, and I hope it sinks in a little bit. Well, not a little bit. I hope it sinks in all the way, because that's the crucial step. It's trapping this once the browser treats it as an object, and then passes it back into this.obj, which is just an uninitialized. I shouldn't say uninitialized. It's reserved here to carry a value, but it's not equal to anything yet. But as soon as I create it, I go and I here, let's do that. So we here, I'm gonna pull this over here. We're gonna go back into here, and this doesn't move yet, right? It doesn't have the property. So the next first thing I had to do was create a new dialog, and I'm gonna just kind of shrink this back so we can look at both at the same time while you're looking at the code, relating it to what's happening on the screen. All right, so first things first, we created a new instance. Next, we create this, I shouldn't say we create, we do. We create the link to the HTML object because they are not one and the same. So then I say d1.init. And as soon as I hit enter, the third step happens because it has to happen at that after this point, after I have that object. Otherwise, it doesn't keep the link back to my JavaScript object because I have a JavaScript object and I have an HTML object and they need to coexist. So I hit enter, it adds the events, and now I can go and grab it and do whatever I want to with it. There. So we created it manually still. Okay, so now what did I do? Now let's look at, right, we know what this pretty much looked like. I did something a little special here. I don't know if I did this last time. I don't think I did. So I added this condition here, and I also set it. I set it in, where did I set it? I set it in, where do I set it? I set it in an event, don't I? On the mouse down, yes. Because this is a dialog box, and this only works for the dialog box, I want to make sure that there's a typeset for the dialog box. Because if I have some other class, maybe I want to add in some, like, a sticky note object or something, I don't know, whatever. I want that to be its own type, and I want to make sure that it's not trying to get into this condition where maybe the structure of children elements and things aren't the same because I'm dealing with a sticky note and not a dialog object, if that makes sense. It does because, I mean, that you'll get into trouble if you don't do something like this. So that was an add. I did put this event prevent default out here now because in something like this where I'm not, like when I'm trying to select other things, so let me just kind of describe it. Now if I'm that lost its that because I didn't create it through the same way, kind of lost its mojo there. Okay, so we're going to just add those here. So now imagine I want to take all three of these and I want to select them and maybe group them. So when I grab one, I grab them all instead of just trying to drag one at a time like this. An application like this says, okay, I don't want to select text. I can get into a different mode for that and maybe stop preventing default. But for now, I just copied it, pulled it back out, thinking that I would go somewhere like that. All right, and then what I did is when I get over an object, right, when on mouse over, that was the other part that made kind of all this work while we have all, like, more than one in the window. I have this on mouse over event that, where is it? I want to say I have it. Do I not have an on mouse over? Am I lying? Oh no, it's on my mouse down. I'm sorry. It's on my mouse down. But I have the mouse over property still, right? We've always had that from the start. So when we click on an object, we're checking for, is the mouse down and is the mouse over something? And if it's over something, it's over the ID, which is set to the exact same name as the object, and I did that on purpose because I can evaluate, and this gets, you start evaluating things and coders start freaking out. And you have to be careful with this because you can inject things into eval statements. All an eval statement does, I'm going to explain it here real quick in the console. So let's say I have, I'm just going to write a string here. It says var a equals 1 plus 2 plus 3. Oh, and by the way, I want to show you one other trick too, because I was struggling with it earlier. All right, so that's a string, and I'm just going to set a equal to that string. Okay, so it's just a string. I can say a equals a plus, let's say, space plus 4. So now the string is a equals 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. Okay, it's just a string, but JavaScript allows you to evaluate strings. So I can evaluate a, and I can add my little semicolon to the end of that. Now what is a? A is 1 plus 2, which is 3, plus 3 is 6, plus 4 is 10. A is 10. So it evaluated this so that the browser can calculate it, and now what's in session in memory for the variable a is the result of evaluating this. Dangerous, because you can also do the same stuff and send it elsewhere and inject stuff into that code and start messing with databases and hijacking sessions, and right, that's all the stuff that is super vulnerable. But in this case, it made sense. And there's times to use things that are, a little weird when they make sense. If someone wants to hijack it, they can. I mean, we hijack everything all the time inside of the local side. But what I'm not relying on in this case is I'm not relying on these things for like server-side events and things like that. So I'm only looking at it to get my objects. So what am I getting? I'm getting the mouse over name, right, that we store. So this one is D1. That it's storing D1, and that is the object because we said D1 equals new object of string D1, and that's, we also move that string into the ID of the HTML object, and then when my mouse is over it, it grabs that ID, puts it up here, and then now I can, so it's this big circle, and now I can go and look at it, but I have to evaluate it because I need to evaluate that to the object itself and then add the events to it once I'm over it, if that makes sense. So before I do anything, I add the events, and it just refreshes all of this, all of the events before it tries to move it. Because again, these are all, they're buried in a prototype, they're buried in a method. These are all kind of local variables, so these aren't persistent. And I don't want to track them globally. I don't. That's too much. You don't want to hijack those events in that way. You might just do that accidentally because they'll start to become too many, and it won't garbage collect properly, and you'll start bogging down your page and all sorts of craziness. And we can bog it down anyway just from, we can add to our heart's content, and we can keep adding and adding and adding, and it's trying to track everything that's happening here. And you could really start to bog this down. It might take a while, especially for me. I have a lot of RAM on my machine. But I've bogged pages down, especially when it's tracking all this data. Okay, I'm going to refresh that. I'm going to set our stuff back to normal. There you go. There's your normal size. Okay, and let's get back into what we were doing here then. So we evaluated it. We got the ID to turn back into an object by doing that, and then we just made sure that the events were running on it. And because of all these local variables we were establishing, we need to refresh them. We need to tell, We need to tell JavaScript in the browser to say, hey, yep, my object has these features again. They have an on mouse down and an on mouse up event. Okay, then we're dealing with the actual browser object again, right? So we're getting that, and then we're getting at the children of those objects, and then I'm setting some styles of like this object here, and I'm setting the style on what? I'm setting this on the HTML element, because that's moelem, that's this one. And then immediately I'm storing what I'm doing through this eval, because I'm evaluating back to my object name again, and I'm storing the new x value when this move thing occurred. When it occurs, right, I'm getting my mouse event, client x, trying to figure out where it's at, and then I just want to store that to my basically, d1.x here, since I'm dealing on d1 or whatever object I'm on, right, d2.x. So that's being stored there, and then I'm setting the top to be on the browser object. I'm setting that top property, and then immediately after I'm going back to the JavaScript class and object in memory, and I'm setting the y value to the same thing. And then I'm going and I'm setting, while it's moving, I'm setting the x and y value in the message. And then when I let go, also, right, now we go back up to the on mouse up event, I say this.id, and I'm evaluating again, eval this.id.draw, and what does draw do? Well, draw just goes and reads up all of our properties, including the message element, I do believe. It almost has to be. Yep, it's this one, e.text.enter.html equals this.message, and it's the last thing we set, so it reverts back to what's in the JavaScript object. And that last tidbit right there, I put in there primarily for you to see that, hey, there's a JavaScript object that is separate, completely separate from this. And this is the HTML object, and we have to take care to marry the two together. So we have to think in this big loop of, okay, order. What do I have to do first? What do I have to do second? And then once it's all there, like, how do I get it all back again? This is going to probably be the one you're going to have to study the most, because it's not an easy concept to say, wait, he's evaling that ID and he's issuing that ID here, and we're setting it on the constructor, and we're trapping it on a mouse click event so that the on mouse move event of the document can go and re-evaluate all that stuff and reattach the event object, and so on and so on and so on. Actually, you need to see at least this one. The double click event, it basically just kind of it did some more weird eval type things. So I'll show you these as well. So if you want to pause it and look, so here's that one, and here's that one. Okay, I actually am going to call this OOP series done. This is about as complicated as I want to get for you right now, and if we find the need to get more complicated, I'll make another series or a supplemental series or something like that that will just come back and reference this playlist. But yeah, that's this playlist right here. So thanks for sticking with me all the way through. I know I get these videos to go long, but there's so much going on. There's so much critical things happening, and they all build on each other, that I'm hoping to kind of just begin using it myself a lot more, Two, that you would go through and you would start using this stuff a lot more and really solidify your understanding here. And that way, when we start to look at now projects of like, hey, let's go build a project, it's going to be primarily done with this in mind. And then the rest of the stuff is going to be like the back end stuff, the stuff like that I shouldn't say necessarily back end, but external resources, server side of sorts, or even like a hosted like software as a service, or something we would query from like a Google for like Google Map data or anything like that. Just getting at the web API, RESTful APIs and things like that. So um, yeah, we're done. I don't really have a I don't have a like a I don't know a hand clapper, but I mean, you should feel proud of yourself if you can get through this and you can understand it all. It might take some time. It might take going to W3 schools or the uh, Mozilla Developer Network, the MDN or something like that. Um, and actually, I want to go to MDN real quick. MDN, Mozilla, MSN, really? That's funny. All right, come on, MDN. And I want to look at mouse events. Mouse event. First document that pops up. This was the document I was looking for in our last video. And it has, so our event object we pass into our on mouse click or on mouse up or mouse down or mouse move or anything like that. This is that so mouse event is what I called event in here. And then when I got like client X and client Y, that's documented somewhere. MDN, luckily, thankfully, has the document. And but they also have like the keyboard event and the context sensitive stuff. So if you really need to do something special, here you go. Um, the really nice thing I love about this, and it kind of puts them up there with W3 schools in that way, is they could have just said this works for Firefox because Mozilla makes Firefox. But no, they're awesome. They also said, does this work for Chrome, or does this work for the Edge browser or Internet Explorer or Opera or Safari? And the only thing in the Chrome's list that's not supported is the Mozilla specific these two properties that aren't standards. So they're the Moz pressure and Moz input source, which I think is going to probably be something like a tablet, finger on your tablet, or like a graphic tablet pin with like a super high degree of pressure sensitivity in it, so that they can start getting at that information in the browser. So all the rest of the stuff is like, yep, it's all supported in Chrome. So we don't even have to switch browsers to use their documentation, which is awesome. Okay, one more thing I wanted to show you before letting you go. Because I did mention it this way. I'm like, man, I'll just come over here and I'll type out my function because I can't really do multi-line over here. I stumbled on it while I was just playing around with code, and here's how you do it. And I want to share it with you because it made a huge difference for me, because now I can just type in big things in here. So I can say, let's just make a function, var abc equals function. Now I want to hit it. If I hit enter, it says, well, that's the problem. That's what I was struggling with. So if I hit the up arrow again, now if I hit shift enter, it brings me down to a new line. I can even indent, space. I can say something like return 50 or something like that. I can hit shift enter, close that out, hit enter, and now I can just run ABC, and there it is. That's my function, right? So I didn't do that right, but that's all right. Oh, yes, I did. I did that right. What am I thinking? Like, what the heck is going on here? ABC, it's like a method, right? 50. So it actually runs the function when we call it like a method at that point, because it is a function. ABC. Don't forget the brackets. Boom, done. All right. Anyway, that was kind of harsh to watch, but I wanted to share that little tidbit. You can hit Shift Enter, Shift Enter, Shift Enter, and you have all the multi-line use of the developer tool that you need. I probably should have read up on this tool. I haven't been. I need to go back and do that now that I'm not making videos for the series anymore, because I kind of find that I need to go look at things like MDN and look at other aspects. So anyway, I'm rambling again. One more thing that I think is worth looking at, just because sequence matters here so much, and there's one more thing that occasionally it gets in the way, and it has to do with misunderstanding what the different types of events do. And what I mean by different types of events, I don't mean like if it's a mouse event or a keyboard event. I mean there's two different ways for JavaScript's behavior to deal in events, and it's called bubbling. So if you are going to be working with events and you're having problems, I recommend going and just search it. Just search it out. Do a web search and do JavaScript event bubbling, 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 and just understand it. I don't. It's one of those things I'll go back and read up on. I know it's there, and it has to do with when things get nested. When, like, if you have a form object and you have a text box inside of the form, and you click on that text box, and you need that event to bubble back up into the form object itself, and then maybe that form was a part of maybe a window object, or whatever, just these nested items. There's this bubbling aspect to events we didn't cover, because I wanted to show you the power first, and I'm not even going to show this to you. I'm just letting you know that there is one other area I think is worth you going and searching out for yourself and trying to wrap your mind around it. And I'm going to call this this good at this point. So again, thanks for sticking around. Thanks for sticking around for the little blurbs at the end and the rambling and the rant. Thank you. Thanks for spending your time with me, and be looking for more videos. I'm not stopping here. This is just kind of the ugly rough draft basis. No, this is the overview for beginners to go from like zero to hero. So spend the time to digest it, spend the time to go learn, spend the time to just go learn the things that I pointed you to. There's so many more things to go and learn, but I would really, if you feel super uncomfortable with the stuff that I've shown you, focus on those things first. And then if you have problems, go leave them in the comments, and I'll try to address those that way. So, all right, guys, take care. I'll see you around.